Hey, it's Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and welcome to the Black Belt Leadership Podcast, where each week I'm giving you tips, tools, insights, and resources to help you become a better version of who you are and what you do as you discover, develop, and deploy your own Black Belt leader within. Now, if you've been listening to the podcast for any length of time, you know I tell you that leadership lessons and personal growth lessons can be found anywhere and everywhere as long as we're open to look. So I want to delve into the field of science, specifically biology, and I want to look at leadership lessons that we can learn from viruses and vaccines. Now, if you're not familiar with viruses, by definition, a virus is a submicroscopic agent that replicates within living cells of an organism. They exist in literally every ecosystem on the planet Earth, and they are probably the most prolific form of biological life living on planet Earth. Now, viruses will not only affect humans, but they can also affect other animals as well as plants, and even bacteria itself can be invaded by a virus. Now, some viruses spread on contact, others are airborne, but once a virus enters a host, whether plant or animal, a unique, complex, multi-stage process begins with one specific goal. The virus wants to continually and speedily replicate itself and spread throughout the host. Now, in most scenarios, this replication and this spreading process leads to illness and disease inside the host. It is a parasitic relationship that benefits one party to the detriment of another. Now, in humans, we've got a unique defense mechanism, our immune system, and that's our first line of defense to combat any infection that we've experienced. Whether it's a viral infection or a bacterial infection, our immune system is there to really ward off those attacks. But once a virus enters the body, bacteria for that matter, the immune system immediately kicks in and begins to respond in a number of ways. The immune system immediately begins to produce antibodies to target and destroy the virus, and it also activates immune cells that seek out and kill infected cells so they don't replicate and spread the disease even further. Now, one of the interesting caveats about the immune system is it has to have some understanding of the pathogen, the antigen, the virus itself, before it can mount a proper defense. And sometimes a new virus will appear that's new to a species. Some of those viruses are so virulent that they spread more rapidly than the body can learn how to mount a defense to combat the infection. And as a result of that, people get really sick and sometimes they die. Now, the medical term for a host organism's immune system not yet being fully engaged and having encountered a specific virus or antigen or pathogen, this phrase is known as being immunologically naive, not understanding this particular virus or pathogen. So in humans, that means if a novel virus that our bodies haven't seen before and our species hasn't seen, that means the body hasn't developed a specific immune response to that particular virus. So memory T cells, B cells, both of which are crucial for rapid and effective defense against a novel virus, are never created. And this is how pandemics get started. So let's take a look back in time to really see where some opportunities to understand this immunological naivety came into play in history. Now, between 541 and 549 AD, a plague known as the Plague of Justinian claimed the lives of somewhere between 30 and million people. This was the first known outbreak of bubonic plague. Now, the second outbreak of bubonic plague, and we know it as the Black Death, killed almost half of Europe. It claimed the lives of somewhere between 75 and 200 million people between 1334 and 1353 AD. Now, fast forward a few centuries later, between 1520 and 1600 AD, during the time that the Europeans were making trips to visit and colonize the New World, we saw in that 80-year period what's known as the New World smallpox pandemic. This claimed the lives of some 25 to 55 million people, but sadly, it decimated many of the indigenous peoples of Central and South America in the process because they were immunologically naive to a virus that they had never seen as a species. Now, between 1918 and 1920, about a 2.5, 3 year period, the Spanish flu claimed the lives of somewhere between 50 and 100 million people. And most recently, you and I are all familiar with the COVID-19 viral pandemic. And that pandemic claimed the lives of an estimated 5 to 17 million people around the world. So when pandemics occur, when these viral epidemics break out, to combat these issues, science turns to vaccines. Now, a traditional vaccine works because it stimulates the body's immune system to number one, recognize, and number two, fight off a specific disease causing organism. Now, again, that could be a virus or that could be a bacteria, but it does so without causing the actual body to contract the physical disease itself. The way viruses work is they expose the body to a weakened, inactive, or part of the disease agent, and that triggers the immune system to produce antibodies and memory cells. So, in the event the body contracts this particular virus or is exposed to it, the immune system knows how to respond. Now, the very first successful vaccine was conducted May 1796 by English physician Edward Jenner. Now, Dr. Jenner noted that many people infected with cowpox during this period of time when we saw the breakout of the New World smallpox epidemic, that people that had been infected with cowpox were immune to smallpox. So in May 1796, Dr. Jenner expanded on what he had learned and inoculated the very first individual to receive a vaccine. It was an 8-year-old boy by the name of James Phipps, and he was inoculated with matter that was collected from the cowpox sore of a handmaid of a milkmaid who had contracted cowpox. Now, fast forward to today, and we see vaccine technology has rapidly expanded and has given us the opportunity to allow mankind to either eradicate or significantly reduce the spread of major epidemics like polio, measles, mumps, rubella, similar viral loads that in the past were of pandemic nature and spread virulently throughout different people groups. And now what we see with new technology is the development of mRNA vaccines. With an mRNA vaccine, a scientist can now instruct a human cell using a small piece of genetic code to produce a harmless part of a virus. And this in turn prompts the body to create antibodies against it without ever having to be exposed to the virus itself. But whether they are mRNA or traditional vaccines, all vaccines essentially do one essential job. They reprogram the body to create an antidote to a virus. But what happens when the mind gets infected? Now, I'm not talking about a viral infection. I'm talking about infected thinking that you and I deal with every day. Now, it's important to remember that you and I remember negative experiences much more vividly and for longer periods of time than we do the positive experiences that we enjoy every single day. And by some estimates, researchers tell us that as much as 45 to 50% of our day is revisiting bad things that have happened, rehashing experiences from the past that were bad or negative, or allowing those negative thoughts to predict the future, leading to dread and fear of what could be. And as a result of that, negative emotions are invoked that amplify those feelings of fear and concern within our lives. Now, this is the case because our brain's neurological response to emotional events is highly sensitive. We have a negativity bias that we have to deal with. We have the emotional salience of negative emotions. There may be unresolved trauma that leads into our brain's neurological response. And of course, what we focus on and pay attention to, as I've shared in many podcasts, is an essential part of whether we're growing or whether we're stagnating in our lives. And of course, we've got those old school primal survival advantages built into our primal brain that cause us to remember potential threats that could possibly save our lives. Now, when I'm talking about negative bias, understand negative bias is hardwired in the brain because it causes us to pay attention to negative experiences and remember them more vividly because negative information is viewed in the brain as important for our survival. Remember, the traditional amygdala and that primal brain system is all about fight or flight. So negative information that is deemed essential for our survival stays in our conscious awareness longer. And when we face similar circumstances or situations to what we experienced in a past negative event, all of a sudden, those thoughts and the emotions that come with it immediately swell back up into our conscious thinking. Now, another thing we need to pay attention to in this negative thinking bias that we have is the fact that the strong emotions that are evoked by negative experiences, and I'm talking about things like fear, anger, and sadness, all of these enhance how our memories are encoded in our brain, how they're consolidated in our memory, and how quickly and vividly they're recalled. The stronger the emotion, the more likely that memory is going to be stored in such a way that it can immediately be recalled and replayed and amplified in our thinking. Now, all of this is part of our primal brain. It's part of our survival strategy that goes back eons ago to our primitive roots as hunter-gatherers. Remember, a negative experience, especially those that involved harm or danger, back in those days, in our traditional tribal era of our existence, those things were beneficial to our survival. The negative things we survived taught us what we need to do or not do so that we can continue living on planet Earth. And by learning from past threats, our brain now is able to avoid similar threats in the future or to respond in a similar manner when situations and circumstances occur that are very similar. And also, if we've got unsolved trauma, understand that there's a subconscious need in our thinking to process that emotional pain or loss and in some way try to close the loop of what happened. Now, the last thing I want to point out in this particular in-depth into looking at how we recall negative emotions so vividly and why we spend 45 to 50% of our day dwelling on these things is this. Negative emotions capture our attention much more than the positive ones. And what we focus on expands, as you heard me say many, many times in this podcast. So ultimately, at the end of the day, the more we focus on the negative, the stronger those memories become. It's like exercising a muscle. The more we exercise it, the stronger it gets. Thoughts are the same way. The more we focus on those thoughts, we amplify and strengthen the vividness and the recall of those thoughts. And this can ultimately lead to a vicious cycle where negative thoughts and the emotions that are attached to them are continually replayed and continually amplified in our thinking. Now, to me, thoughts like this are like ticks. Now, ticks are a parasitic creature that feed on the blood of humans and animals and often spread germs and disease in the process. I live in Arkansas, and if you go hiking in the woods in Arkansas, you're gonna pick up a tick. But interestingly enough, as I was researching ticks for this particular podcast, I found something interesting I didn't know. Ticks are found in every single continent on the face of the earth, including environments like Antarctica and the Sahara Desert. One of the coldest places on earth and one of the hottest places, most unforgiving places in the earth, you can still find ticks. And yes, they still bite. And yes, they'll still suck your blood. And they will often spread germs or disease in the process. How does this happen? When a tick attaches to a host, an animal or a human, their saliva and their feces contain pathogens. Those pathogens can lead to fever, to headache, to fatigue, and to muscle aches. Now, in the United States, and especially here in the South, we have a variety of tick known as the black-legged tick, or we refer to it as the deer tick here in the South. And this tick is known for its ability to transmit Lyme disease. Now, Lyme disease is a bacterial infection that causes flu-like symptoms, and if unchecked and untreated, can lead to serious long-term complications that affect the joints, the heart, and the nervous system. But interestingly enough, a deer tick needs to be attached to a host for 36 to 48 hours or more to effectively transmit enough of the bacteria that causes Lyme disease for it to take hold in the body. And if the tick is removed within the first 24 hours of being bitten, the risk of infection, not just from Lyme disease, but from any other germs or pathogens that tick may be carrying, the risk of infection overall is greatly reduced according to the Food and Drug Administration. So the moral is this: if you get tick bit, the sooner the tick is removed, the less damage the tick can cause. So let's apply that same principle to our thinking. If the sooner a tick is removed, the less damage it causes, the same is true for our thoughts. The sooner we can remove negative thinking from our thoughts, the less damage it can cause. Now remember, a tick requires a host to grow and develop. And the longer a tick stays attached to a host, the more blood it ingests, the larger it gets, and the more pathogens it can transmit to the host through its saliva and its feces. So feeding the tick matures it, and it makes it more virulent to the host. Now, did you get that? Feeding the tick matures it, and it makes it more virulent, more pathogenically dangerous to the host. The same is true of our thoughts. Negative thinking is a parasitic relationship that doesn't benefit us. It actually harms us. So if we think of negative thinking like a tick, negative thinking releases toxicity into the mind that ultimately can affect the body. Now, this toxicity can take the form of scarcity, of lack, of anxiety, of depression, of doubt, and even disease. And the longer we dwell on those thoughts, the longer those thoughts have the ability to continue to inject those negative toxins into our thinking. And as a result of that, the more negatively they're going to affect our beliefs and the corresponding actions we either take or choose not to take. So negative thinking at the end of the day limits what we're capable of saying, doing, and becoming. Now, in this podcast, I say often, as you think, you become. Going back to the Proverbs and the words of King Solomon and the incredible book written by James Allen, As a Man Thinketh. Great reading. If you haven't read it, I encourage you to pick up the book, As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. Better yet, go read the book of Proverbs in the Old Testament. Great wisdom is there. But let's get back to negative thinking, because as you think, you become, and that goes both ways. If you think negative limiting thoughts, guess what? You're going to become a negative, limited person. This is what I refer to as infected thinking. Because when we're sick, we can't perform at our best. And when our thinking is sick and it is infected with negative toxins, we can't perform and rise to our full potential. So if as you think, you become, if negative limiting thinking leads you to become a negative limited person, then let's flip the script. Let's look at the yin and the yang of that. By thinking positive, limitless thoughts and focusing our attention there, guess what happens? We become a more positive, limitless person in the way we see ourselves and our opportunities and the world around us. But going back to what I talked about at the very beginning of this, if as many as half of the thoughts that you and I think every single day are negative, how do we go about flipping the script? It requires that we reprogram our thinking. Reprogramming is an antidote to infected thinking. Now, it's important to remember, and I talk about this often, and I refer to this in my book, Black Belt Leaderships of Success, as well as in my book, Master the Art of Self-Confidence, that the only thing that you and I can truly control is our thinking. We have control over what we think, how we think, why we think, and where we focus our attention. So think of it this way. What you and I continually entertain in our thoughts, what we get comfortable thinking and revisiting over and over again all day, every day, those thoughts that we focus on, that we pay attention to, ultimately take control of our lives, and they dominate not just our thinking, they dominate what we're capable of saying, doing, and becoming. And don't forget that thoughts are images. They are visual pictures that we see in our mind. And the more vivid the picture, and the more emotions we can attach to that image, the more prevalent, the more vivid, the more powerful that image stays in our mind. So maybe rather than focusing our energy and effort on negative thinking and amplifying those images, maybe we need to begin to focus more on the positive images and the positive thoughts that we have. Amplify those images in our thinking and attach positive emotions to those so we replay those again and again and again in our thinking. Because remember, the more we focus on any specific thought, the more vibrant they become and the more readily they're brought back to our conscious attention. Now, if you don't believe this is true from what I'm sharing you, let's go back in history and let's look at some people that understood the power of infected thinking and how to overcome it. I'm talking about individuals like Albert Einstein, Thomas Edison, Walt Disney, just to name three of many famous failures who went on to become exceptional, highly successful individuals. Einstein, Edison, Disney, all three of these men were told they would never amount to anything. They had a viral attack from the opinions of other people. It was like a tick that wanted to attach itself to their thinking and inject negative thoughts and negative emotions that would hold them back from becoming the incredible people they ultimately became. So just like Edison, just like Einstein, just like Disney, they face the same choice that you and I face every single day. And that's this. Are we going to allow other people's opinions of us and our potential to dictate who we are and who we become? Are we going to allow them to inject a virus of negativity or to attach themselves like a tick to our lives and continually inject us full of negative opinions, negative words, negative thoughts, and negative speeches that they speak to us seeking to limit our potential? Or on the other hand, are we going to choose to see ourselves as we know we are capable of becoming? Do you and I choose to dwell on the negative, or do we choose to focus on the positive? Again, as you think, you become. So really the question is, are we going to accept another person's limited view of our potential, or are we going to hold to the limitless image that we have of ourselves? You know, all too often, we allow other people's opinions to attach themselves to our thinking. And like a virus or like a tick, they continually inject those negative pathogens into our thoughts and into our lives that hold us back from achieving and developing our full potential. So now that begs the question, and you may be asking, so John, how do I inoculate myself from these pathogens of negativity? How do I reprogram my brain so it's no longer affected by infected thinking? Well, first, you've got to identify and you've got to challenge the negative thoughts that are taking place in between your ears every single day. You've got to learn to recognize those negative thoughts and those negative beliefs that you're carrying around and that you're entertaining day in and day out. Because once we learn to recognize and see those negative thoughts and beliefs for what they are, we can now question their validity. We can look at those thoughts, we can look at those beliefs, and we can ask ourselves, are those negative thoughts and beliefs based on facts? Or are they based on an assumption? Or are they based on other people's beliefs or opinions? Or is there any validity to this negative thought or this negative belief that we're carrying around and we believe to be true when we find out by challenging it and questioning its validity, it may not be true at all? So challenging our thinking gives you and I the opportunity to seek an antidote or a vaccine to counter the negative impact of negative thoughts, negative beliefs, and negative habits that we engage in every day. So think of this as the equivalent of you being the doctor and you're diagnosing the cause of your infected thinking, or you've discovered a tick that has attached itself to your thoughts and it's pumping negativity, pumping negative toxins into your thinking. And now you've got the opportunity to either prescribe a vaccine or to get a pair of tweezers and remove the tick. Now, the second thing we need to do to reprogram our thinking and to create an antidote for infected thinking is we need to replace the negativity with positivity. So this is simply a process of identifying and replacing the negative thoughts that don't serve you well with positive thoughts that do. You and I have to do that every single day by guarding our thoughts, taking every thought and make it captive and make it obedient to our will. Because as you and I focus our attention on what we do, all of a sudden we see we're capable of saying, doing, and becoming more. But if we focus our attention on what we can't do, we're going to spend our lives saying, I can't, I won't, and therefore limit our opportunity to grow. But when we focus our attention on what we can do, we begin the process of reprogramming our thinking in terms of how we see ourselves, how we see the world around us. And as a result of that, we begin to see the limitless opportunities that each day presents. When we approach the world with a positive outlook, we're going to see more opportunities than if we approach the world from a negative mindset. That's why we've got to reprogram our thinking to have an antidote for the infected thinking that's holding us back. When we inoculate ourselves against negative thinking, we've got an opportunity to change our lives for the better. Again, you and I control our thinking. We control what we think, how we think, when we think, and what we're going to focus our thoughts and attention on. So when we take every thought captive and we make it obedient to our will, what are we doing? We're building our positive thinking immune system. And as a result of that, we are boosting our ability to combat negative thinking when it comes our way, and it will almost every single day of our lives. We create the ability for our thinking to develop an immune system, a process by which it's going to seek out and it's going to destroy the negative, limited thinking that's holding you back from your full potential. So this is how you start to reprogram your thinking to change things for the better and have an opportunity to go from being held back to being released to step into the greatness of who you were created to be. So think about this as I get ready to wrap up for today. You and I, we don't feel a virus when it enters the body. We're completely unaware. When a tick attaches itself to an animal or to ourselves, we don't feel the tick when it first bites. But here's what I can tell you. If we allow that virus to replicate, if we allow that tick to stay attached, in a few days, in a few weeks, we're going to experience the impact of their invasion in the days that follow. If we're not properly inoculated or we fail to recognize a parasite that has attached itself to our bodies, we're ultimately setting ourselves up for infected thinking in the future. Remember, a tick that's not removed within 24 hours is much more likely to spread illness and disease. So negative thoughts not removed in the same time frame are much more likely to spread toxins of doubt, negativity, scarcity, anxiety, depression, and disease through our thinking. And when we see the world through a negative lens, all we can see is what we can't do rather than what we can. We see what we can't become rather than what we could become if we simply step into the greatness of who we are. So remember this, a failure to inoculate yourself through daily personal growth leaves us vulnerable to the negative thinking that's constantly being spoken to us, about us, and we're constantly revisiting in our thinking. So by daily focusing on becoming a better version of who we are and what we do, you hear me say that often, we continually strengthen our brain's protective immune system. So negative thoughts are identified, targeted, isolated, and removed from our thinking. Remember, vaccines essentially reprogram the body to create an antidote to viruses, and reprogramming is the antidote to infected thinking. I'm Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day.